Hello and welcome to the maiden edition of Talking Transport. I am your host, Darshan Husseina Usman. And on Talking Transport, we will be focusing on the transportation system in Nigeria. We'll also be discussing the different modes of transport, its evolution, and what is obtainable in present day. But we cannot start in earnest if we do not do justice to the history. Take a look. As humans, we have always sought progress and ways to make life more meaningful and comfortable. Curiosity brought out the scientist in us, and constant innovation and invention opened doors to potentials we never knew we had. The evolution of transportation has brought us from riding on animals to space travel. Traveling by foot was one of the most common means of transportation all over the world, and it was the most used in the medieval ages. The first known vehicle started with the introduction of the early boats, also known as log boats or rafts. Horses and other animals such as oxen were also used as a means of getting around and transporting goods. It was also roughly around this period that the wheel was invented. In 1769, the Watt steam engine changed everything. Boats were among the first to take advantage of steam-generated power. Over the next 10 years after the steam-powered velocipede, dozens of different designs for self-propelled bicycles and motorcycles appeared. One mode of land transport powered by a steam engine that did go mainstream was the locomotive. Development for cars started as early as the 17th century with the invention of the first steam-powered vehicle, which led to the creation of the first steam-powered automobile capable of human transportation, built by Nicholas Joseph Cugnot in 1769. The start of the 20th century was truly the dawn of a new era in the history of transportation, as two American brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, invented the world's first airplane. In Nigeria today, railways, roadways, waterways, and airways are the major types of transportation. There has been a lot of complaints on how political instability, lack of continuity of government policies, and resource limitation has hampered the growth of everything, especially the transport sector. Our first focus will be the railways. History has it that trains practically revolutionized the transportation industry. With rail transport, passengers and goods are transferred in a train, which is a connection of rail vehicles moving along a track. These trains are pulled using a locomotive, which is a more powerful vehicle situated in front of the train. Unlike most parts of the world, Nigeria can only boast of two types of tracks. They are the narrow and the standard gauge.
When you hear narrow gauge, it doesn't mean that the line is narrow. Oftentimes, as people assume, it only talked about the dimension of that line. It's like one of the least in terms of dimension. What appears to be the deficiency is that it doesn't allow the train opportunity for maximum speed. And it's also done in consideration that the nature of the terrain it is going to pass is not as straightforward as in standard gauge. Standard gauge differs from it because of the width, the dimension of the rail laying. And the advantage thereof is that it allows a train opportunity for, speeding than a narrow gauge. It gives a train more balance to operate on speed. The locomotive you see on the narrow gauge does not release its full speed potential because it knows where it is running on. If the same locomotive of the same capacity is placed on standard gauge, maybe in a space of 1 hour, while narrow gauge will be running 60 kilometers per hour, that of the standard gauge may be running 100 or 120 as the case may be. So you see, you cover wider distance or longer distance on standard gauge than in narrow gauge.
The narrow gauge line is about 3 feet wide and is the oldest known gauge, launched in 1898 between Lagos and Abeokuta. Hence, the establishment of the Nigerian railway system on October 2nd, 1912.
How the railway started in Nigeria, it actually started in the year 1898, and then the first rail line was built between Lagos and Ibadan, 112 kilometers, and then back to back, and then 1912, the trains actually came into Kaduna. Kaduna is very, very strategic because it's actually the headquarters of northern Nigeria, if you look at it politically. Until date, if you look at governor's meeting, when it's about to be held, it's actually done in Kaduna. So Kaduna is very strategic politically for the north. So the rails came in here 1912, and why it's called Kaduna Junction is simply because the narrow gauge railway system actually has two main branches, which is the Eastern Railway and the Western Railway. So Kaduna Junction serves as, let's use a geographic term, a confluence that actually bridges the West and the Eastern Railway.
It also has various routes connecting Lagos, Kano, Minna, Kafanchang, Kuru, Jos, Gudi, Bauchi, Maiduguri, and other parts of the country.
The history of Nigeria is not complete without the railway system. In short, at the point, the railway was the highest revenue earner long before we discovered oil. In short, even after we discovered oil. In short, I've read in history books that when the federal government goes broke, they borrow from the coffers of the Nigerian railways. I still read in history books that when the president of the country, or then when we had a prime minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, when he's proceeding on his annual vacation, the managing director of the railway takes over from him. And the reason is simple. The railway is the highest employer of labor in the country as we speak, even now as we speak. So him having that capacity and that finesse to manage such large capacity of staff actually gives him that leverage that he can manage a country with a large population. So you cannot just throw the narrow gauge system away. The narrow gauge system is 3,505 kilometers. Besides sidings, just the lines, 3,505 from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, from Kuru to Jos, from Zaria to Kaura Namuda, from Kano to Unguru, from Idogo to Ifo. You can't throw away this system. Then the one that was commissioned recently by the president, the Barrow Port. Barrow Port would have been alive and well if the lines between Mina and Barrow is connected. Why that port is not functioning is simply because that line is lying fallow. The day you construct that line, boom, Barrow Port comes into limelight again. So you cannot abandon the narrow gauge system. Like we were discussing earlier on, India has the largest rail system in the world. For every 5 minutes, you see a train in a station in India. And they have the whole 4 railway lines working. The broad gauge, the standard gauge, the narrow gauge, and the meter gauge. They are all working and interconnected. We call it interchange points. They actually enter each other either by stations or by a bus shuttle service. You can actually buy a ticket, and if that train is not reaching you at that time, a bus service picks you to connect. And let me shock you, Nigerian Railways had that system. Yeah, they had it. Passengers who were traveling between Funtua and Lagos, because the train does not originate from Funtua, they buy tickets from Funtua heading to Lagos straight, and then Nigerian Railway buses bring them to Zaria to connect the train. So we cannot do away with the narrow gauge system. In short, we have 4 dry ports, and one right now is being proliferated in Funtua, Katsina State. And all of them are connected to the narrow gauge system. How do you want to decongest the roads? How do you want to decongest the ports when your narrow gauge system is abandoned? So I'll call on the federal government and to the Honorable Minister that please, more locomotives and more coaches. I've seen what he's done. He's brought in some wagons. I pray it's for the narrow gauge system, but more locomotives are required. Late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua bought 22 class locomotives. That's the locomotive you just saw on the Mina train. That locomotive came in the year 2010. And it's been working perfectly until now. It's an American spec locomotive. It was produced by General Electric, right? So we cannot throw away the narrow gauge, because when you're doing that, you are throwing away over 9,000 workers from the rail system, and that will be disastrous to the labor market.
Sadly, the narrow gauge rail system has been in a comatose stage for quite a while.
This is the old train station in Gudi, and as you can see, we've come in contact with some of the old narrow gauge trains. That's the coaches that were used back then. Let's take a look at inside. It seems to have been scavenged because there's nothing in there but a bunch of old foams from the seats, if I may assume, and logs of wood. If only the government can do something to rev up the train sector and make transportation in the country more viable.
Some actually have some challenges, but repairable challenges. Of course, there are some that are not necessarily, even if it can be repaired, no attention of such will be given until management approves for their burden to scrap them off. Now, the idle capacity is what gives rise to some of the things you are seeing, which ideally is not supposed to be so. However, if those coaches are needed for operations, they will not only be cleaned up, routine maintenances will be carried out. As a matter of fact, there are schedules already when we have preemption, that there will be possible running of trains. The section department that is responsible for them, the carriage and wagon, already have carried out assessment of virtually all possible possible usable coaches and wagons on what will be done on them. And I bet you once approval is given, if actually they will be needed, they will revamp them for use.
Insecurity has been a major headache in recent times. That's why a lot of Nigerians turn to the railways. But with recent records, are our railways really safe?
The train service is still the best because of the issues we're having on the road. And if you believe with me, you can see that since the beginning of the train services, we experienced this attack only once. But for the road, it's countless. So therefore, at least we don't have any other alternative if we must travel, then to resort to, taking the train. If you are talking of security in Nigeria, we have a very big problem because the security threat is from all angles. It is not maybe a one-sided thing, so that the government will, put force in that area and curtail whatsoever. But you hear security threat from this angle, another one from another angle. If I can put it right, as far as security is concerned, the country is in a state of, confusion. But I believe it's not going to be, something permanent. But I employ the government to, gear up to action, to see how they will take care of that issue. Because security is a key. If there's no security, no any other thing can, flow.
Well, it was actually scary because I was going to travel on a Friday, but I had to cancel, and then I think they stopped movement of the train until after they fixed it. But then, we still have to move and we still have to travel, and I guess this is the safest option to go with. And, we just pray for safety before any trip.
Well, it's scary, really scary, but I just feel safer in the train than in a car, because I really must make this journey to Kaduna to see my family. So for me, it's safer. I mean, the number of attacks on the road is much, much higher than this, than the train. And fortunately, I believe and I hope that government will have put some checks in place to prevent such kind of happenings again. Sometimes you have to give everything back to the Almighty, because He dictates whatever happens to man.
It was a shocking news, to hear, because a lot of things ran through my mind in that instant when I first got the news. Plus, I even had a close friend who's like a brother who was on that particular train. So it was, trying to figure out, is he okay? What's happening? What's the state of things? How was it resolved? And all. It was a rush of many, many thoughts and not so good emotions, because the train was like one of those aspects of travel that you feel like it's a solution to a problem that is being battled, by the government and by the people. But after this incident, I lost any little form of confidence I ever had in it, and I'm only going because I'm under instruction. But ultimately, I would have preferred to have not even traveled at all because of the state of things.
You see on the roads, you see FRSC personnel sweating on the roads, and because it is just inherent in a larger portion of Nigerians that we are stiff-necked, we are stubborn. In short, they call this generation the coconut head generation, because we feel we have studied so much, we know so much, and we cannot abide by simple rules and regulations. But you see, the real sector is not like that. There are 3 rule books I use in my department. I'm not talking about other departments, they have their own rule books too. The block telegraph regulations, the general rules, and the working instructions. These are safety books. And then there's what we call temporary speed restrictions that is brought in by the civil engineering department. When they tell you, kilometer this to this, please maintain so number of speed or amount of speed, you have to follow it to the letter, because safety first is our motto. If anything goes wrong on the tracks, it's going to affect thousands of people on board the train. When you're approaching a station, it's called you're approaching a facing point. You slow at 10 kilometers per hour. That's why you're asking me, that train is coming in, why is it slow? It's a regulation. So trains are like that. We work strictly on regulations. And where you don't work by those safety regulations, you get a knock on your head, a hard knock. So you go by these rules, and that's why you find very minimal accidents in the rail sector. The accidents you found happened in the earlier part of the year was simply due to sabotage. I'm very sure that the road transporters were not happy that we're hauling pipes for Kaduna State government, so they sent in people to remove rail fasteners, clips from the tracks, and then the train came on in, the gauge expanded and they dropped. So the one that happened again 2 weeks ago is just sabotage. People are actually not happy that the train takes the stress. I don't know why. I don't know why they keep doing that. But it is the safest means of transportation.
Does the government have plans of improving our railway systems to accommodate the massive number of travelers? Find out more on our next episode.
I hope with this, we've been able to help establish how transportation came to being. Until I come your way next time, I am Darshan Hussaina Usman. Thanks for watching.